Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and today's video is going to be a wrap-up of all the things I read for Torathon over Memorial Day weekend here in the US. The Torathon is a readathon that was arranged and hosted by Libby, dedicated to reading Tor.com's short fiction. I chose to mostly read Tor.com novellas because I had 4 of them hanging around I really needed to get to. I also read 5 short stories from their website and didn't enjoy those as much, but I'll go over those very quickly as well. But mainly this is going to be the novellas that I read. The first 2 novellas that I have to mention are Gluttony Bay and Taste of Wrath by Matt Wallace. These are numbers 6 and 7 in his Scene du Jour series, and they're the conclusion of the series. So this is in general about the members of the Scene du Jour catering company who serve the supernatural world. They have been having issues where all the events that they have catered have ended up as disasters, where they have been attacked. Something is going on and the supernatural world is in turmoil and seems to have turned against them, and there's something up with their liaison, a man named Allensworth, who seems to have his own agenda. This is the showdown of all these things happening when forces are amassed on both sides, and it's really just this catering company against the forces of evil and things like that. I really liked the conclusion of the individual characters' story arcs. I feel like the characters are actually the real strength and core of this series overall. They've always been done really well. Just like individual character stories, but also their relationships with each other. Yes, a lot of this is almost gross out comedy. There's a lot of humor, there's a lot of vulgarity sometimes, but the people feel real to me. And there is some really great character growth for, I think, almost all of the characters, but a few in particular, like Moon, really surprised me in these 2 final stories, so I really enjoyed that. The thing that I have noticed about the last couple of stories in this series is that it feels like Matt Wallace has inserted a lot more of his personal beliefs and reactions to current US political events, and I am not so sure that I think that those things meshed completely with the story. Sometimes they actually jarred me out of the story because my first thought was always, is this really the characters talking, or is this the author speaking through his characters? And the second thing I thought was, this is not gonna make any sense in 5 years when readers are not as aware of the really emotionally charged real-world context that this story was written during, you know? Like, they just weren't going to stand the test of time very well. They're gonna become out of date pretty quickly. That is, of course, Matt Wallace's choice, not mine. I got through it just fine, but, you know, fiction's always political, it always has been. With something so obvious as this, if you don't necessarily agree with Wallace on some things, it could really turn you off, potentially. On the other hand, if you've gotten through like 5 or 6 of these and you don't get the point, I don't know why you would have read this long if you didn't already kind of subconsciously agree, I guess. But anyway, this series was a lot of fun. I'm glad that I read it, and I will definitely be looking out for whatever Matt Wallace does next. Next, I read Beneath the Sugar Sky by Shauna McGuire, which is the 3rd of her Wayward Children novellas. This one takes place after the events of Every Heart a Doorway, so maybe skip the synopsis of this if you haven't read Every Heart, because I'm about to spoil one of the things that happens in it. So in this one, Rini, who is the daughter of Sumi, shows up at the school for wayward children and asks for their help in retrieving her mother from death, because Sumi died in Every Heart a Doorway before Rini could be born, but then somehow Rini was born, so her existence is a paradox, and it's like the realities of the worlds are trying to heal over this paradox, and Rini is slowly disappearing. She doesn't want to wink out of existence entirely, so she wants to bring her mother back so that she can be born at some point. So she and some of the other students from the school go off on this quest to essentially reassemble Sumi and see if they can bring her back to life. Obviously, this can't be done with the highly logical, rational rules of a place like Earth, but if you go to a high nonsense world like, let's say, the candy world where Sumi and Rini are from, just maybe it could be possible. I really liked the idea of that in this story, just this quest to put Sumi back together again and to keep Rini from disappearing. It was really cool, you know? It was interesting to go to a high nonsense world like this candy world or whatever it's called. I would not want to actually go there. It would drive me crazy. I'm a very rational person. And it was interesting to see some of these characters in a world that was the complete opposite of what they were intended for. It did not work very well for them. Like, Christopher is from another like world of the dead, and this is not his type of place at all. So yeah, it was interesting to see more of the worlds up close rather than just the one from Down Among the Sticks and Bones, and to actually see Nancy in her natural element and all that. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I really enjoyed being back more in like the present day at the school and the kids who live there and what happens next to them. I'm hoping that the next stories in this series will once again focus on characters after they've returned from their worlds and they're trying to get back. I would love to see a story about Christopher, for example. That could be really great. And the last novella that I read is Stone Mad by Elizabeth Bear, which is a follow-up story to her novel Karen Memory. So the main character is Karen, who is now an ex-prostitute. This is set in a kind of Western gold rush type of world. It's also kind of steampunky, I think. They have mad scientists. Her girlfriend slash wife, Priya, is kind of a mad scientist. So after the events of the novel, Karen and Priya have now set up house together. They've purchased a ranch and are now pursuing careers now that they're no longer prostitutes. And so this story begins with them going out to dinner. It's a real fancy dinner to celebrate the beginning of their new lives and being together and everything. As they're trying to enjoy their meal, however, these two women sitting next to them have a supernatural event happen at their table. Like, it's rocking around and everything, like there's a haunting or a possession going on. And Karen is trying to figure out if they're faking it to get out of their bill or if this is an actual thing happening. And then it starts happening to her and Priya's table. The majority of the story is really about a supernatural creature called a Tommyknocker that's usually found in mines, but for some reason there's one in the city, in this building, and it's not very happy. Karen sticks around to investigate this and try to solve the problem. Priya ends up going home kind of in a huff, probably because she's not happy with Karen putting herself in danger again and not considering the consequences of that for the people that she loves, like Priya. So I really enjoyed everything up until the end in this, and then I was kind of not sure why the ending happened the way it did. I thought this was going to be a story about the Tommyknocker. All of the setup, the bulk of the story is about that. But it turns out most of it is all set up for a conversation that Karen and Priya have about how their relationship is going to work. And I just feel like that wasn't actually signaled enough by the beginning of the story, because my expectations for the ending of this were completely off base. What it actually delivered on was fine. I think that story about Karen and Priya together was very worthwhile, and I liked knowing that, but I felt like there was some sort of slippage in the structure of the story where things did not meet up quite the way they should have. You have the end of the Tommyknocker story and then an extra 20-30 pages to end the rest of the stuff in the story, and I thought it should have been a bit more concurrent, maybe. I think that I may have actually enjoyed this more than the novel Karen Memory, maybe because it seems it's shorter, it's more focused, and it doesn't let the conceits of the world get out of hand or tedious. And in particular, I really like Karen. I like her character and her makeup and her qualities and her flaws. And she has this very uneducated way of speaking, like in a vernacular. It's very grammatically incorrect. Now, Karen is very intelligent. She's just not formally educated, so there's a reason why she talks this way, and I think in some ways she preserves this intentionally. It's part of who she is. But in a longer story, I feel like this is a conceit that could become a little tedious, a little overdone. In a shorter story like this though, I never got tired of it, and I really enjoyed the character. This is not a story that you can really read on its own. I think you have to have read the first novel, but this is definitely a worthy follow-up story. Then to cap off Torathon, I read 5 of the stories that are available for free from Tor.com's fiction section. I read Where Would You Be Now by Carrie Vaughn, which is a prequel story to her Bannerless world. I haven't read the novel Bannerless, but after reading this, I really would like to try it. I'm not entirely sure what's happened in the world, but basically the world has crashed. It's almost kind of like an after-apocalypse type scenario. And in this story, it's basically a facility of medics who are trying to maintain their facility and provide services to people in the face of the crushing realization that they can really not change things. They're not going to recover the world to the way it once was, and just dealing with lack of food and hostile outsiders and uneducated people with no birth control who are popping out babies faster than they can feed them and care for them and stuff. So I liked it. It didn't blow me out of the water though. Then I read You Know How the Story Goes by Thomas Olde Heuvelt. This is like an urban legend ghost lady in a car trying to kill people story. I really didn't like it. Not really into horror stories anyway, but I thought this one was written in a very amateurish style, let's say. The next one that I read was also really disappointing, and that is Breakwater by Simon Bestwick. This is about a war between newly discovered sentient race in the deep oceans of Earth who are fighting against humans who have, you know, been polluting the oceans and everything. And I won't really go into this one, but it felt like the diversity and the sexual content in this were just shoehorned in, and it was really not good. It's really not good. Next is Our King and His Court by Rich Larson. I've read quite a few stories by Larson now, and I've always been impressed at his storytelling ability. He can write really well. I do think that some of his stories are more violent and graphic than I really like. He seems to like writing about soldiers, and this is an example of that. So really well told, but in this particular one, I was really not into the violence in the story. And the last story that I read was Under the Spinodal Curve by Hanuš Seiner. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. I believe he's a Czech author, and this is translated into English by Julie Nováková. This is the 3rd story I've read by this author, and this one, like all the others, was really interesting to read. Just reading the story was an experience, the language and everything. I felt like I really had to pay attention to every little detail. But this one was too vague. I really don't remember the story of it that well. I feel like it's about people who can split off part of their personality into metal to manipulate metal into doing really fantastic things. But that thing that's in the metal is separate from what's in their bodies, and then eventually these two parts of the same person have to be reintegrated. And the story is kind of about a man who falls in love with a woman who hasn't been reintegrated yet, and when she is, she may forget about him and may not be in love with him again, and he wants to find some way to make it more likely that she will reintegrate successfully and they can still be together. But the end of it was very vague. It wasn't conclusive. It didn't really feel like an ending, like there were any answers, and that was a bit disappointing. But the idea in this one was really interesting. I wish it had been a little bit more concrete, less abstract. And it reminded me that the 2 previous stories I read by this author were kind of similar, really interesting topics, a very alien sense of the alien. So in conclusion, a very weird and interesting story that probably won't work for most people, but I think it was pretty cool, and I really hope that Nováková keeps translating his works and that they get published, because I would love to read more by him. Those are the 9 or so things that I read for the Torathon. Hopefully this happens again, because it was a really great way for me to get into reading some of my backlog of Tor.com stories, and I really need some motivation to keep up on that. So let me know if you have read any of these, if you have any thoughts on them, and I will talk to you again very soon, and until then, bye.